about staying. The way that we like to start the discussion is to ask if there were any particular moments or scenes or phrases that stood out for you that resonated particularly strongly or that are kind of sticking in your mind. There's no right or wrong answers. It's not a test. But if there was anything that that you felt particularly strongly about from the show.
When was it written?
Well, the first scene was originally written in 1992. It was just a 10-minute one-act short scene play, and then she expanded it last year into a full length. Well, in 2010, and it premiered a year ago in San Francisco as a full-length play. So it was mostly written. This draft was dated November 2010.
Because one statement that stuck out for me was something about this is still happening, or I didn't know this was still happening.
Yeah, they said it's not like this anymore. Why is it still like this? Yeah, so it was very recently expanded. She had the playwright had made a speech in March of 2010, talking a lot about the issues that she's encountered as a woman playwright, and that one of the first plays that she had written was getting really great response, and then one particular critic in New York skewered it and said that she was a feminist, and so then everybody stopped going. The regional theaters around the country that had expressed interest dropped their interest, and for more than a year afterwards, everybody kept saying, "Oh, I saw it and I loved it. It was so great." But that review, and so it became sort of attached to everything that that being a woman playwright, if you write about women, you're a feminist, and if you write about men, you're a feminist. And so how it just sort of became suspect to be a woman playwright at all. And so there's the text of her whole speech. There's a link to it online on the page, the web page for this show, if you're interested in reading that. But that's, I think that was a big part of why she decided to expand from that initial first scene into a full-length play. She had more that she wanted to say. Others? No? Well, so how...
I was just going to comment that I think it's interesting the similarities between how women are treated in this play, how that parallels racism as far as discrimination.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes?
Actually, there was a part in the play where the supervisor, Stu, mentioned like EO complaints and sort of a sidelong through the chain of command, I guess, and how we can't let her do that. And you still see that a lot in many organizations where you have this separate line of authority that goes to the top, but the supervisors are still able to be like, no, you can't do that. There's, there'll be reprisal, but there won't be a reprisal. So, well, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. How officially or unofficially things are dealt with or contained.
Yep.
Yeah. And so what about that? I mean, how about the different ways in which the different characters were discounted, their points of view or what they were saying? I mean, did you feel like Eliza was a whiner, or did she have a valid point, or did your opinion of her change through the course of the play, or anybody have any?
I seem to see 5 people up there, only one of which seemed to be a decent human being, and the other 4 a bunch of bitches, as far as I can tell. which was horrible. I mean, I get to watch my own wife up there being like, "You are a horrible person." And Michael Patten, who I think is like, I want to give bear hug him all the time. I found that it was pretty transparent, not necessarily transparent, but very much apparent that they were not really concerned about who does the best job. And of course, working in a corporate, I do work in a corporate culture, and I worked at Microsoft for 10 years, and you see people that aren't, that whether they're good or bad or their job, people don't always recognize. It doesn't matter whether you're good or bad. It matters that you play by the rules, and that's the crappy thing about society in general. Is like you want people to be recognized for that they do a good job at something, and that's what Eliza's not being recognized for, which you see from the from the get-go, right? Like that, and Ben picks up on it. Like the only thing he cares about from their first conversation is, I want to see her goddamn plans because I'm wrestling with this thing, and she's got a solution, and I know she's got a solution, and I want to see it. And nobody cares. Stu doesn't care. Nobody else cares. Nobody cares if she's doing the right thing.
Because she's not doing it in the right way.
Yeah, she's not doing it the right way. She's not playing by the rules. And like the solution instead of having a nice looking building that's appropriate for the period is to put a coat of paint on it. I mean, it's like, I got it makes well, then I'm going to say that next time you want to renovate something on the house, I'm going to say, well, just put a coat of paint on it, it'll be fine. No, but it's so apparent. I mean, it's so pervasive. I think in our culture that people don't pay attention to whether or not somebody actually does a good job. It doesn't matter as much as if they actually play by the rules, and that's a shitty thing. And I think this brings that to light in a really palpable way. I think. I loved Eliza. I wanted to hug her the whole time. She's great. What's that? Well, she doesn't play by the rules, but she's good at what she does. That's the whole point. Is that you want to be rewarded for being good at what you do, and that's why you try to do a good job as an employee. That's what I hope anyway. Someone's going to fire me probably next week, but I try to work hard and do a good job in hopes that people recognize that I do a good job. Not because I necessarily always go to the correct supervisor or to anybody else, but that I do a good job, and that's what people should always be recognized for. Is if you're good at what you do, that should be a good thing, and not considered like a threat, or you shouldn't hate her, Stu.
Oh, I'm not Stu.
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
I'm Michael.
I know.
Give me a hug.
I will give you a hug in about 5 minutes after she's done with you.
Well, but so one of the things that you said, Jay, was about that there was one character that you thought was decent and the other you thought were kind of shit heels, and so I'm wondering.
Ben was on the fence. Ben sits on the fence for a minute.
Well, so as audience members, what's your sense of how balanced a view? Do you think the playwright stacked the deck in a way to make you root for certain characters in certain ways, or how three-dimensional or how real do you think each of these people were or weren't, and have you encountered people like them? Don't worry, nothing will fall out of the booth. But were they cardboard cutouts, or were they people that you recognize and have encountered yourself?
One of the reasons I watch shows like The Office, or one of the reasons I really enjoyed this reading is, and I think this it goes for a lot of people, is because we find these things funny or engaging or upsetting because they reflect what we are experiencing. I can tell you from personal experience, scene out of The Office, I had a woman imitate a chipmunk in front of me because I didn't want to do the paperwork for her. So I thought, I actually found that the personalities and the portrayals were pretty true to life. The only thing I would recommend for Eliza is she should be tape recording her meetings. No, seriously, she should be. I mean, or as people, when we find ourselves in these situations, the best thing that you can do is document it. Even if it's just for letting know.
Well, I differ. I found it pretty two-dimensional. especially the first act.
Especially,
The first act.
First act.
There was a little more depth in people. Found a little more about why Stu's such a stuck person in the second act. But you didn't get backstory for anybody really.
So you found it more difficult to kind of engage or relate to them because of that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's one conflict, and it was interesting, but the people weren't fully fleshed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I disagree. I think Eliza was fully fleshed. She stood up for herself from the beginning, and I think that's important for a woman to do, especially in an all-male field. And I really like her. She's my favorite character because she stuck to the right thing. She stood by her guns. She stood by her principles, and she wasn't going to waver. She was going to stand up to Stu and all the other people until the very end for her principles. And I like that. And I also like the character Ben. He struck me in the end as being compassionate. That the better side of him was coming out. That what Eliza was talking to him about maybe stirred his conscience a little bit, and he decided not to be such a jerk.
Well, it's interesting. So the sort of underhanded machinations of what Eliza did, setting people up and lying, I mean, that didn't bother you?
I didn't
that was part of being principal, and you didn't see that as being at odds with?
I didn't see her setting anybody up. That part I must have missed, but I didn't see her setting anybody up. I saw her sticking to her principles, especially as a woman.
Because I mean, twice first she passed off her designs as Weber's,
Yeah.
so, and then she had
Passed on my design.
for the ducks that she knew didn't
Oh.
work, and you know that was setting up Janice to set up Stu with a solution that she knew
Then
wasn't.
that would be wrong, but I think the spirit of Eliza was very good and decent and trying to stand up for herself.
That it was coming from a well-intentioned place.
Yes, I think so.
Well deserved.
Yeah.
Kept her human, like she was pissed off, and so just,
I'm sorry,
human.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I kept her human, like, she
wasn't Joan of Arc. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, because she was frustrated and angry, and so maybe that's not something I would do in that position, but she did what she thought she needed to.
Other comments or responses?
So I thought the two characters that didn't move very much for me were Weber and Stu. They were pretty stable throughout. You knew kind of what they were when they came in. But I thought that Heather's character, I thought started off like, oh, I think she's going to be good. She's going to be a good person. Like, she's going to be Eliza's friend. And it's going to be fine. And then as she went, you all of a sudden realized like, nah, she's going to let her hang out to dry. And that was sort of surprising. And Ben, I saw a bunch of motion and all over. So, I mean, I found more three-dimensional, as if you were asking, that was the question you were asking this. I found more three dimensions in Heather and Ben's characters as far as is that I was never quite sure where they stood. I mean, Ben showed his humanity right off the bat by saying, I'm more concerned about the work. And that he was just sort of trying to appease Stu a little bit as he went. And by the end, it was clear that he's like, whatever, I agree, the machinations of this place are shitty, so let's go out and have dinner. Was fine by the end. But Weber and Stu were definitely, those characters are pretty well inked in a not, I don't want to say classic stereotype, but it was pretty clear from the get-go where they were headed.
Yeah, where they stood. Well,
Yeah.
so what about the comment about being the Nazi collaborator? That Eliza accuses Janice basically of being a Nazi collaborator, and that's why they don't have a problem with her as a woman. But the flip side of that is Janice has been there 3 years, and that's what she needed to do to be able to, the first
Survive.
year they ignored her except for asking her to bring coffee. And so the choices that Janice has made to get along, to fit in, that is that right or wrong necessarily, and that Eliza also accuses Ben of kind of maintaining the status quo and playing along because he's threatened by WE'RE coming in. And so again, like some of the compromises, the different, I guess what I'm asking is, the different ways that people can respond to the same situation. And that Eliza's response is taking a stand and saying, no, this isn't going to play, this is not going to fly. And Janice getting the coffee and hanging in there and being patient and waiting it out and then finally getting some work, although, yes, she's still not really taken very seriously. And yeah, WE'RE comes in and talks a lot about nothing in very elaborate ways, and gets himself put on projects, you know, before, he's not playing by the rules either. He's playing by the old rules, I guess, old school rules.
But I think that's what the playwright is saying, is that those are the rules that are still...
Well, right. I mean, he's doing what he needs to do to get ahead, to fit in, to get on board and to get ahead, and so is Ben. I mean, so that they're all kind of responding to what Stu calls the system in very different ways, and so I'm just
it's funny,
making that
it's like
observation.
you watch or you read a piece like this and you feel inspired that, you know, we should do the right thing. We should do the right thing at work. Although I also know that personally, like in those moments at work where I get caught up in an attempt to do what I think is right, man, that's when the bell goes off. It's an alarm in your head. It's time for me to step back because it's not helpful for me to be right. It's helpful for me to only to do right if everybody can come along together on that trip, right? So I think it's pretty real in that way, you know. That sometimes you gotta make nice and get along and go along, and so
that's one of the biggest points for me in it is that Eliza sticks to her guns, man, and she is not going to let her principles go, but she takes it right in the teeth, and I think that's pervasive in this society as we go through and you see something that's wrong and you're in a corporate structure or any sort of structure where there are people above you who don't necessarily think that way. If you speak out, 9 times out of 10 probably you're going to take the fall for it. And it's, like you said, it's fucking shitty.
Yeah.
And we just, it's that game that we live in. On what days is it more important for me to make sure I have the steady job and can do this thing? And on what days do I feel more like that Batman? Like this guy.
Well, right, when are principles
tilting
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's just you got to pick your battles, and that's the whole key. You don't want to fight for what's right every day. If it means, if you got to pick what's an important thing to fight for, as opposed to trivial. You can let a lot of trivialities go, and if you don't, if you make everything the most important thing ever, nothing's going to be important. I see that a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes principles are a luxury that someone can't afford. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, people get repeatedly thrown under the bus because they're unwilling or unable to let go of, that for them the principle is more important than holding on to the job, I guess.
I like how it ends. You don't really know what, there's some question. I mean, you could assume that Eliza's going to go out, Sue calls and Eliza's going to go out. Or maybe she goes out to dinner with Ben, but eventually there has to be that confrontation between her and Stu, and he doesn't even have the balls to fire her, probably. So
Well, he doesn't have the authority to.
Right, okay.
So what about David, the unseen character, the boss?
Yeah.
What, what do you all think about David? Do you have any
I
ideas?
seem kind of ambivalent because Eliza has a relationship with David. David hired her. And it was, I don't remember unless I missed it, that she met with him or did she?
Something happened during intermission.
Yeah.
between Act 1 and Act 2.
Yeah, okay. So.
Yeah, she's about to meet with him, and then Act 2 is a few days later.
So it's unclear, it was unclear to me, what her relationship was with him.
That's the one stereotype that wasn't in the script. Nobody accused her of sleeping with him.
Although we talked about that in rehearsal. Yeah, it did come up in rehearsal.
Yeah.
And we had different opinions. I mean, we had different feelings about. Because and that I think what we kind of came to is that the playwright intended for it to not be necessarily crystal clear what their relationship is, or what the nature of it was, or but nobody did accuse her of anything. So whether something else was happening or not, we don't really know for sure. But you were gonna say
Yeah,
something?
I was going to say, I don't think I like David that much, because although he's able to recognize talent, he obviously doesn't care enough to look at his company and see where leadership lies, like who's taking care of business. I mean, if I had taken about 5 minutes and checked to make sure that the main supervisor spent all day getting sauced, then I'll either make that guy go to therapy or kick him to the curb, no matter how many years he worked for me. But that's just me, because also after watching it and seeing that the supervisor is also taking on a protege who has sort of the same views as him, or is able to be molded more. He's continuing this septic atmosphere of just non-acceptance. So I don't think I like David that much. He just doesn't really care enough.
Yeah, he can't even show his face on stage.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought everyone was super three-dimensional for me. Like, I worked with all of these people very recently. Really
Yeah, we're sorry.
Yeah, me too. The ending is really kind of depressing for me. It just feels like, I don't see any kind of, I would like to see some ray of hope, right? The goodness in the relationship between Ben and Eliza for me is that, the two smart people at least recognize each other's path, right? But, nothing in the system appears to be about to change or anything. I didn't get any sense that he was being fired or anything like that at the end. So, they go out to dinner, great, but there was no.
You wanted more of a resolution to it. You wanted
or
a glimmer of
one.
maybe.
Show me some glimmer of something changing somewhere. Because, the whole point seems to be, I can't believe it's still like this. Now show me when it's going to be better. Show me what's going to make something better in the future.
I got a little bit of a ray of hope just from their last scene together, because if Ben's been there a long time, and he's probably known by everybody, including Stu, of being the one guy who actually knows what the hell he's doing. And if he can cast a lifeline to Eliza, then I think she, at the end of the day, ends up not only surviving, but at some point probably ends up thriving. You hope, because talented people bond together and they kind of form a.
Right, maybe they go off and start their own agency.
Or they could, or he literally can go up to Stu and say, smack him upside the head with this Scotch bottle and say, look, dude, this.
Well, right, or he could talk to David.
Or he could talk to David and say, look, she's got the cojones, she's got the skills. Like, let's make the thing happen here. Let's not screw this up.
Put her on one of my projects.
Sorry, this has gone badly. Let's reset and let's go for it. So I got a little bit of a ray of hope. I got more of a ray of hope than you did.
I guess so.
Well, and again, there's no right or wrong.
Yes.
And that's the thing about this, is that you all can sit in the same room and see the same exact performance and have completely different perspectives, because who you are before you came in is going to affect how your perception, how you receive, what your perspective is of the show. So I just want to, disagreements are fine. People will have different points of view. It's not right. Yes.
Well, I think I agree, about the second act. I actually enjoyed it more of the nuances of the characters. The first act where I saw, talking to that's two-dimensional. At the end of it, like that one line at the very end was really what I brought home. It's like when she said, let's just get rid of the ducks. We're just like, no one would say that. I mean, no one outside of that field or inside of that field would say that. It was just really trying to show that she didn't know what she was talking about. But it was so over the top in that comment. I just don't see anyone even proposing that, unless she was saying it as a joke. But that's not what it was, right? It was to show that she didn't know what she was talking about.
Well, I mean, she was asking what would happen, and the answer is nothing good. But
that was so over the top. I mean, it's like, who would propose that? Who would propose that?
Yeah, I guess Jets.
So that first act, that's where I saw it, like that first act, when it came home at the end of her asking that. That's how I saw it in this two-dimensional, because it was just trying to show that's who she was, that's who Stu was. But then, the nuances really came out as a more.
Yes, to come back to the ending. So I get the glimmer of hope, but it really bothered me that it was like a date that they were going on.
That's true.
Having worked in a male-dominant environment, I would not, that's not cool. Like, if they ended up as friends or some sort of alliance, whatever, but a date just seems like that's the opposite of glimmer of hope in a way. So, I don't know.
That's sort of more of the status quo.
Exactly.
It's like the Hollywood ending or something.
Right.
And just that whatever, however good she is, it's like, oh, well, that's because she's been girlfriend kind of thing. And I don't know, it just kind of bothered me.
Yeah. Well, it's the identification of her as woman instead of as architect.
Exactly, yeah.
He says he wants to talk about the ducks.
Well,
Yeah.
so he's I don't know, yeah.
Because it's funny. Right.
Yeah, that's funny.
If it had been drinks instead of dinner, that probably would have been made it a little bit better.
Or worse. Yeah.
Well, because colleagues go out for drinks after work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the first thing he said, though, didn't he? Didn't he first say, like, let's go out for a drink?
Yeah, I need to get that. I could use a little.
Yeah, I could use a little. And then he says, come have dinner with me.
Dinner, yeah.
But then he's confused about whether or not it's a date. He's like, well, I guess I'm asking out for a date, but really, I think he just wants to say, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
And go and talk about work outside of work.
The first time I read it, I had the same reaction. I was like, really?
I know.
That's like the romantic comedy lover in me was like, oh, how exciting! And then the feminist in me, mother of a daughter, was like, ew, I like this.
That's right. He has seniority too, which is
I know.
Sort of that.
That's very illegal. You're not supposed to do that.
Just talking about the ducks.
Yes.
I think it's worth noting that Eliza never actually accepted the date. So we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know what happened.
It's
true.
Or not. And not, 5 seconds before, she called him a coward.
A coward,
who
true.
just wants everybody to get along. So it didn't occur to me to be, oh, I can't believe she went on a date with him. It was more, well, there you go. And when we get to that sort of glimmer of hope, I don't think the glimmer lies in that final scene, but rather in the whole idea that somebody is trying to say something.
It's actually my favorite part of the play is when she calls him a coward and calls him out on that, because it flips that little switch that germinate, because he's had the thoughts in it, because people just don't change. Right, you're right, I was a coward, if they don't already have that in them. And for whatever reason, he was keeping silent during all those meetings when she was getting dumped on by everybody. And
Right, and that he did think he was the nice guy,
Right,
the good
he
guy.
did,
I was
yeah,
on your side,
exactly.
in my head where nobody else would hear it, but
Yeah.
I was on your,
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words.
Yeah.
You're a coward. I thought that was great. I love that.
Yes.
I think the hope lies in the phone call, because he's gonna get in one big argument with, was it Eliza again? And, David's gonna be checking out that plan and be like, what the hell, were you drunk when you drew this up? And it'll all come out.
So that's your hopeful moment.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Other thoughts or responses?
The architects I know aren't so toxic.
I know,
Good.
right?
I
I know a ton of really nice, not heavy drinking,
Architects,
yeah,
lovely artists,
with great family lives,
and a great sense of design
and they're funny. And they don't drop F-bombs.
And I don't think they have horrible workplaces.
Yeah, I think, and it's just purely my assumption, I have no real evidence to support this, but my assumption is that it's because it's a creative workplace, that it's a stand-in for theater and for some of the other, I mean, the playwright, she's also the executive producer of Smash and has worked in a lot of television and Hollywood type things where, again, like in creative environments, a lot of people think, it's so much better in the creative fields than in the corporate world, and I don't think
disagree.
that's actually, exactly, I don't think that's actually true. And so an architecture firm was a good stand-in for her, that it's still a creative field, and there's still a lot that has to do with talent that is able to be quantified, recognized in a quantifiable way. That's not just purely subjective or pure opinion. That she can say, my talent is like, it's like a tree. You can't deny it. It's there. And then says, yes, it is. And so that's why I don't think it's that she's casting aspersions on architects necessarily. But
There was that one line, where, who says it? Ben says it, something about collaborative, and, everything we do has to be collaborative, and it's been corporatized or something.
oh, right, working on teams and
Yeah, and I think that's so, that's particularly true in like, the theatrical world, especially in TV. I don't know, I think that line was really powerful to me for some reason. It just struck out. Even in like Microsoft, everything's collaborative nowadays. Everything's team oriented. No one gets credit for their own individual stamp at some point.
right, well, and that individuality in that sense isn't as encouraged or rewarded as teamwork.
Yeah.
And Stu's whole thing in the first scene of Act 2 about, well, this is how we work in a group, and you have to be able to hear to, let's get to, okay, Janice, hit her with the dormers. That's what it's all about. And so, you have to be able to take criticism, and even if it's from people who don't know what they're talking about, to be part of the team. Pretty cool.
Man, everyone was so great. It was so wrenching.
Thank you. Oh, so the one other thing that I'm wondering about, because I realized halfway through the first scene that I forgot to warn everyone again, just at the beginning, that there's some strong language in this play, and for people like me, I swear like a drunken sailor all the time. I don't think much of it, but there have been there was one reading particularly in the past that we did that a couple of people were really offended and got up and left in the first scene, and so I was very clear about in all of the publicity materials, making sure that there were warnings. But I'm still wondering, were people taken aback by that? Were you surprised? Did it sail over your head?
Well, it's not just strong language. I mean, it's really offensive, sexist language. And so, of course it's offensive. I mean, I think that was relatively effective. And sort of said so casually by people.
that it was offensive for a point.
Eliza's first speech.
Motherfucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm a sailor, so it's fine with me.
That's why we get along.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I have a friend who is very concerned with feminist issues. She works at Microsoft. She's a manager there. We've gone to, she's invited me to sort of feminist topic talks before, and I specifically didn't invite her to this because she also very specifically hates strong language. You know what I mean? And so when I saw that on the warning, I said, I wouldn't invite her to this because I know she wouldn't like that. And so even though it doesn't bother me, it doesn't bother her. It doesn't. I know people that would be interested in the message miss out. Also, yeah, and maybe I didn't give her the chance to say no or yes, but I'm pretty sure she would say no. So anyway, so I just there's some audience, there's possible audience loss. It's an important message.
Yeah. There's some people who don't want to hear that kind of language at all in whatever context. I mean, whether it is purposely offensive to serve the point that they're trying to make, or if it's just gratuitous cursing. I'm not good with either, personally. But that's me. Yeah, I'm not everybody is.
Yes. I mean, the language was actually stronger than I expected, because, Nicole mentioned to me, I'm like, no big deal. However, it really fit the scenes. It felt very appropriate to me, and it seemed very true to life, so.
I don't know. That's not my experience in the corporate world. The language or the drinking in the office or any of that. To me, it seemed way over the top.
I'd have to agree with you, having done some corporate stints myself, that I never saw anything like that happening, because if it did happen, you were immediately
I think
dealt with.
because in the corporate world, there's like all these, there's so many sexual harassment training and stuff in place in a lot of corporations nowadays, or universities or schools or health organizations, like whatever it is that you're working in. But if you're working at a theater or like on a production set for a television show, there's not those.
That's true.
There's not those things in place at all.
It also, I think it makes a difference on the size of the company, whether
That's
it's
true.
a small privately held
Small office
company, or whether it's a public, huge corporation.
But the fact that they had like an HR, they talked about going to HR.
Right. Yeah, and a $6 million, $6.5 million client.
Yeah,
that's a little more than a small firm.
Yeah. I think the sexual harassment stuff definitely is a lot of the stuff's in place in almost every place I've been around. But I have to admit that we do have a kegerator at the office, so that's just I think every business is different. It's for as far it doesn't matter big. We're not a small business, 2, 3, 4. But it's different. The culture is different from place to place. But I think the sexual harassment stuff definitely would not fly in any place I've ever worked in. That wouldn't have happened. But I don't know about TV or in playwriting or in who knows.
I think the language too was mostly in offices between a couple of people, and that for me is very common.
Right,
in a small
closed
environment
doors.
where in a meeting you're not going to be using that kind of language, but one-on-one you would, or you hear it.
So I'm remembering that the first scene, and it was the dialogue was sort of mammoty and overlapping and interrupting a lot, and that really changed in subsequent scenes. Was that your intent as a director, or where did that come?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that the first scene was written 20 years ago initially, and so it does have a slightly different feel than what comes after it. But the playwright does have a very specific kind of rhythm in dialogue, in the way that she writes things, and we heightened it a little bit more in that first scene because they are kind of talking over each other. Yeah, and there is that. Yeah, you're not listening. Are you listening to what are you saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. And so, yeah, whether it's Ben scrambling to try to keep up with Stu to make sure he's on the right side and saying the right thing, or if they're at odds, or what, you know, that some of it was interpretation, and but mostly it's there on the page. But I do think that because that first scene was originally written 20 years earlier, and then she came back to it, and I'm sure she, you know, adjusted a little, so it wasn't completely separate from the rest of the play, but there's a little bit of a difference also. So it was both the chicken and the egg, I would say. Would you all agree with that? Or? I'll still pick regardless.
No, I think that's really true. I think that first scene seems quite different. But I've had 3 rehearsals with it, so I've got a different perspective than people who would never have heard it before. So it was interesting to hear you say that, because when I first read it, I remember thinking, oh wow, this is like Speed the Plow. And then we got into the next scene, and it was like, oh, no, it's not. So.
Basically, a lot of this really didn't work for me, and I think for me it had to do, I think, with it felt like points of view were being expressed through characters that were not very complex. It did feel more two-dimensional for the most part. And I think like there were a couple of things I'm comparing it with, and one was I had to get credits for therapy counseling stuff. And there was a study guide about workplace harassment, sexual harassment, based upon the movie 9 to 5. And that was really interesting, because I mean, you see that, and of course, it's played for laughs, and it's played for entertainment, much more so. But it came through for me, and with the awareness of thinking about it, the study guide, and looking at it, I hadn't seen it, and it probably is that same era 20 years ago. So I think that the sexism in the workplace is much more overt, the harassment is much more overt, and it didn't ring true for me to the conflicts that were going on. I mean, I'm not in the corporate world, but it didn't seem believable. Somebody was saying, you know, have the drink there and have somebody actually going to work in this place and staying there with all that talent.
Well, it's been 5 months, though. I mean, it hasn't been 5 years.
It hasn't been that long.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking too about like just the era of things, and I think it's interesting that the first act, which, yeah, I mean,
not so much for you.
Not so much for me, but more the era. Like I'm thinking about things like Mad Men, and so kind of over time back there. You know, things that seem real cartoony at first, you actually start to get to know the characters, and the ones who seem just very...
the most exaggerated was?
Yeah, maybe despicable. I mean, they are. I mean, they're much more despicable. But you kind of get, over the time, I mean, the characters are still developed. And I think that, of course, you know, this is much more condensed than all of that. But that character development was something that I think is necessary for it to really work. I didn't get that.
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. I think it's interesting. It's interesting to me that I think part of it has to do with whether you've actually worked with these people. When you've been in the situation, then these characters are immediately recognizable, you know, like you were saying, and they don't seem two-dimensional. When you're lucky enough not to have worked in this situation and encountered these people, yeah, then it is a little bit more two-dimensional. I mean, when I first read it, I have worked with all of these people, and I loved the script, and I was really excited about it, and Joe was the artistic associate, and I was like, okay, you have to read this and tell me that's just me because I've experienced this, and that's why I was like, yes! You know, so if it was just my own personal filter that was, so, you know, like, okay, I needed to get some objective viewpoint. Like, do you still think that it would translate for other people? And so, yeah, so, you know, that the answer is not always, not everybody can, which that to me is sort of the hopeful part, that yeah, there are people who haven't experienced this. Because, I've had the displeasure of experiencing it more than once, in the arts and not in the arts as well, and that a lot of what Eliza says has been exactly my frustrations. And why is it still like this? It's not supposed to be like this. They said it's not like this anymore, and yet to encounter some of these people, it's like, are you serious? Because it's not 1975 anymore. It's not 1985, which is more when 9 to 5 was, and it's not 1990. Like, it's 2010, it's 2012. Why is this still going on? And people say, oh, it's not like, oh, we live in this post-sexist, post-racist, everything. We're so over everything. It's like, no, we're not. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of it, you know that, no, it's still completely like that in places. So I can understand why, though, that if you haven't experienced it, that it.
Right, I was going to say, I think that's a great point, because when I read the play, I was like, when was this written? Because I have never experienced it. And then I remember the first rehearsal where some of the cast was just talking about some personal stories, and I remember coming home and, telling my husband, like, did you know that this is still happening? And people are still using the word tits, and what? And I was like, this is really happening. We kind of had this debate about, oh, it is. And so I think that's a good point, that if you haven't experienced it, it is kind of, you're not really quite sure, is this really 2012? And then clearly it seems like people have this experience, people have a different perspective when they do see, or a different point of view when they hear the script.
Yeah, so that in that sense, that's why I think it's important that it was, written and to try to do it so that people can see, like, well, yeah, it is still an issue, even though it might seem kind of two-dimensional or not as fully resonant for some people. It's like, yeah, it still exists. It's still going on, unfortunately. And so if we can at least try to make it a little funnier in some ways, a little bit more, not necessarily palatable, but easier to talk about. And so to talk about, well, yeah, she stuck to her principles, and and I like that, or no, he seems completely, fake, and people don't do that anymore. But to be able to have a conversation about it is what I like. So
I thought it was interesting that when Eliza and Janice's characters got into it, that Eliza expected Janice to back her up because Janice was a fellow woman, and Janice kind of, went, no. She kind of pushed Eliza away. And I find that in all my years of working that some women do expect a sisterhood. And it doesn't always work that way. There's some very traditional women that don't want to be associated with fellow women workers because they're feminists. By God, I don't want to be associated with that camp.
Right, you're pissing everyone off. So I'm not one of you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anything else?
So one other thing that I've been thinking about in the last few minutes is whether or not we've experienced directly sexism or racism, we've probably all experienced dysfunctional workplaces. And maybe one of the pieces to take away is how that creates a fertile ground for all the isms. And how it creates somebody who, from a position of being principled, winds up doing something as destructive as Eliza has to do, or feels she has to do in a situation. Or I'm thinking about the illnesses of the dysfunctional family in the world.
So, final comment. The principles of it is something I would never do, but it's just being devil's advocate, like coming from whoever's perspective, new guy in the company. It's like, wait a minute, all I gotta do is talk about civilization, humanity, and history, and drink scotch and get paid for it. This is the best job in the world.
Well, on that note, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
For staying